Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. And the headlines that I'm reading right now, just coming across the BBC, is as follows. It says, an arrest warrant has been issued for Russian President Vladimir Putin by International Criminal Court for alleged war crimes, including deporting Ukrainian children. That's interesting. They are going to attempt to arrest the head of a nuclear-armed state. Not just a nuclear-armed state, probably the most powerful nuclear-armed states on the planet. Now, the problem I have with this here at MFAN, the voice of reason, why hasn't the International Criminal Court placed a warrant for the arrest of African despot Isaias Afwerki? Or for that matter, an arrest warrant for the East African despot Abiy Ahmed. As we speak right now, Abiy Ahmed and Isaias Afwerki of Eritrea have modern-day actual concentration camps in which they are exterminating persons from other ethnic groups that they do not get along with or disagree with. Very interesting how that works. Would you call it hypocrisy? And what's the true reason, the real reason, for this arrest warrant of Vladimir Putin? If you're going to issue an arrest warrant for a crime that you believe has been committed, shouldn't you do that for all crimes? But again, we continue to see the subjective nature of some of these Western-backed neoliberal institutions. What's good for one is not good for everyone. What was that? The Animal Farm? All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. I mean, you can't deny that it's not happening. It is happening. Now, obviously, what's happening in Ukraine and Eastern Europe is garnering more attention than what's happening in some other places around the world. But that doesn't make it any more brutal or any more criminal in nature. And I would have to say, by watching what is happening, I would say that what occurred in East Africa, especially by Isaias Afwerki, the despot of Eritrea, is many, many, many times more brutal and criminal in nature than what we're seeing happen in this very much conventional high-intensity war that is taking place in Eastern Europe right now between Russia and Ukraine. So what's going on in the current war? Well, we continue to see the Bakhmut pocket collapse. Here we're zooming in. Well, I don't think there's any reason to reverse and fast forward. Again, the fighting now is taking place more or less in the city center. It looks like the Ukrainians really have one way to get out of town. It's just this muddy dirt road that is to the north. It's in the northwest quadrant of the city. And again, essentially, the 3 brigades of the Ukrainian military are still trapped in Bakhmut. I don't believe at this point it is a matter of the Ukrainians deciding to withdraw or deciding to stay. They don't have a choice at this point. They are what is in an encirclement, and it's very difficult for those thousands of Ukrainian troops trapped in Bakhmut to just pack up and head west. If they did that, the Russians would be able to strike at these convoys and destroy the Ukrainian host in zone. And that's why we're not seeing this run out of Bakhmut, because the Ukrainians cannot run out of Bakhmut. In all likelihood, we're watching the Russians set up a mass capitulation or surrender of Ukrainian forces in Bakhmut. Now, what's interesting is beyond Bakhmut, we have heard reports, there's published reports, for instance, in the Washington Compost, that, did I say the Compost? It's not the Compost. It's the Washington Post. The Washington Post. I stand corrected. So the Washington Post did an article with Ukrainian battalion level leaders. And those battalion level leaders indicated that essentially Ukraine was losing the war, that the situation was dire, that Ukrainian battalions, and in this specific combatant commander, he has seen essentially 100% turnover, meaning 100% of his battalion has been killed or wounded during the course of the one-year conflict. And what remains of his battalion battle group is for all intents and purposes, somewhat trained soldiers, meaning the battalion, and I believe this was an air mobile battalion that started the war, was fairly proficient. They executed well, obviously. The Russians did not meet certain goals. But through the course of this conflict, that battalion has been beyond decimated. It essentially has been destroyed and then reconstituted. And this Ukrainian combatant commander, battalion commander, again articulates that, look, we are in no position to conduct offensive operations. We don't have the supplies, we don't have the ammunition, and more importantly, our troops are not trained to a proficiency that would allow ongoing offensive operations, much less defensive operations. And from my understanding, this combatant commander has since been relieved of duty and is no longer commanding forces in the field. So again, as we have talked about before, the Ukrainian propaganda is really kind of shaping the narrative of what the West sees in this war. And unfortunately for people here in the United States, they're hearing a false narrative about what is happening. Now, is that to say that the Russians are highly successful and are doing a great job through the course of the war? No, we're not saying that at all. Obviously, the Russians have have seen some serious setbacks, and they have seen several operations, especially during the early stages of the war, that were simply not achieved, defeated. Now, what's happening now, again, is we're starting to see this Russian war machine take hold of the conflict. And again, if you look at and you speed up and you watch what's happening now in Bakhmut and some other places, you hear these anecdotal reports from the Ukrainian side and actual Ukrainian troops. And the situation on the ground is very, very much dire, but they're trying to keep this positive spin on it in order to keep this flow of money and supplies from the United States and other Western countries continuing to flow into Ukraine. Now, the problem I have with that is I don't know where this money is going. And given the nature of the current government here in the United States, it's highly likely that a lot of this money that is flowing into Ukraine will then turn around and end up back into the coffers of the Democratic Party here in the United States. Incredibly corrupt, deceitful organization. And I'm just very much concerned that all this money, these hundreds of billions of dollars, are going to just do a quick spin right back into the bank accounts of the likes of Hunter Biden. So that's a concern, and it's a rightful concern, and it's something that if you are a tax-paying citizen here in the United States, and the United States is essentially writing blank checks to what is tantamount to an incredibly corrupt government in Eastern Europe, the Ukrainian government. Again, look at just what occurred with this combatant commander talking about a real-world issue that he's having issues with, that he's having challenges, and Ukraine purports to be a transparent democracy, and yet this battlefield commander is unable to speak, and he then loses his command. So interesting to see that happen. It's interesting to see, again, how the battlefield is unfolding. Again, we're watching very closely near Bakhmut as the weather starts to become less wet, as we see the ground start to dry up going into summer. It will be interesting to see what each side is preparing to do. We keep hearing about the prospects of a fairly significant Ukrainian counteroffensive taking place. But if you look and you listen to what's happening on the ground, it's difficult to imagine that happening given the current state of affairs inside the Ukrainian military. Now, it is possible that we could see some sort of counteroffensive. Now, is it going to be this massive operation that severs the land corridor to Crimea? I highly doubt it. Don't think that's in the cards at this point. Don't think that is possible at this point. Again, and we are simply going off of what we are hearing on the ground in terms of what is happening with the Ukrainian army on the ground. And again, the Ukrainian army that exists now is not the same Ukrainian army that existed at the start of this conflict. They have been beaten up. They have taken a lot of casualties, and they have expended a lot of, or most of, the supplies they have started this conflict with. So that's kind of where we're at right now. We will continue to watch. We will continue to report. And again, thank you for joining us today. More to come very soon. Have a good day.